What's going on, everyone? It's Hayden Dale, joined by Brendan Patrick for an Arsenal Pass deck tech. This is our first time doing one of these deck techs, but it's something that people have asked for, in the comments and on our podcast in the past. So we've decided it's time to bust out a deck tech. And if you listened to our pod last week, we spoke about a chain deck that myself and two other players played in a PTI event that was put together by this man below me on screen here, Brendan Patrick, and two of his teammates that he's been working with. Dante, the skirmish champion, Delfico, and Davis, town number 9, Kingsley. So today we're going to talk through the deck a little bit, some of the main features of it, the sideboard, how we played against different matchups and strategies. And yeah, but how about before we get into it, Brendan, why don't you tell us a bit about exactly what this chain deck is trying to do? What's its game plan and what's the core ethos of it?
Yeah, so it's not on the board right now, but one of the most important cards of the deck is actually Nebula Blade. So we chose Nebula Blade over Galaxy Black, or really any of the other options. In order to utilize Nebula Blade to the full extent, you need to be playing non-attack actions. So you see quite a few in this deck. The goal is really to swing in with, come in with a few attack actions and swing with the Blade for 4 and threaten that on-hit trigger of getting the Rune Chant. The Rune Chant itself also does go hand in hand with other cards like Meet and Greet, and we do not play Pierce the Shadow Visor, Rip Through Reality, but the opponent doesn't know that. So it can present a lot of situations to the opponent where they're presented with a single arcane damage, and it's very inefficient for them to block that one arcane. But if they don't, there's a large amount of situations where they'll be just drastically punished for it. The main one in our deck being Meet and Greet. So the Nebula Blade is super important for this deck and is kind of the backbone of it. Outside of that, the most powerful cards and what this deck is going to try to do is utilize Art of War. It's going to banish attack actions. We have a very specific number of attack actions to increase our chances of always having one in hand, and basically that Art of War always being live. With that said, Chane is a somewhat higher variance hero to play, even in Classic Constructed, and that may be due to the deck's, kind of the way it is built. And there's a significant difference between the games where you actually get to play your Art of Wars versus when you banish them off the top.
Yeah, I can attest
As
to
well
that.
as yeah, as well as things like Plunder Run. That's another non-attack action that feeds the blade. But those two cards in general are gonna allow you to have these massive turns where your opponent won't even essentially be able to block out your attacks from hand effectively, and will take damage even blocking with the whole entire hand. So you have sort of like a little bit of inevitability with that. Another really, really important card for this deck is the Grasp. So we play the Grasp with the Arknight. This is actually what makes the deck somewhat complicated. It's pretty straightforward in 90% of your matchups. You're just going to be shackling every turn, just presenting tons of damage, and almost every deck will wilt against that. That being said, when to make a Rune Chant and when not to, and let's say you have 3 different attacks coming this chain. Do you make it for the first one, the second one, or the third one? That's really where the complicated sequencing comes in, and where a lot of the skill of the deck is. Along with that, pitching your deck to make sure you're banishing a lot of blood debts at the end. That's very, very important. And then also sort of, we talked a little bit about 90% of the time you're always going to be soul shackling every turn. With that said, there are some decks in the format, most notably what this deck lost to in the finals, which was Ninja Control, that will actually try to turtle you. You can get lucky, and you can soul shackle every turn. You can play all of your Art of Wars, all of your Plunder Runs, and those decks will lose pretty much 100% of the time. They just can't deal with the damage. But if you don't get so lucky, and you do end up banishing those Art of Wars, banishing those Plunder Runs, those decks will fatigue you. So in order to combat that strategy, you need to identify what's happening, identify the ninja's archetype, identify what the Guardian player is doing, so and so. And then you need to change up your game map pretty drastically. Soul shackle very conservatively, and your main game plan is to pitch your deck, get your blood debts at the bottom, make sure you have very strong turns that will come later in the game, and also get out at least two, I would say, dimensional crossroads, and have probably each of those try to do around 5 arcane damage. The arcane damage is really how you're going to eke through these decks that are going to flick flack you or just throw everything in front of you and just try to fatigue you, because you're naturally going to burn more cards than they are, even if they're defending with 4 cards from hand every single turn. So it's a serious concern.
Yep.
Another thing go ahead, Hayden.
Oh, no, you keep going, Brendan.
Sorry. I just want to talk about the Carrion Husk. So the Carrion Husk is probably one of the I think it's one of the best Flesh and Blood cards ever printed. And we did a lot of testing and running with this deck on Fandel Spring Tunic. Fandel Tunic is really, really good with Art of War. And this deck, tends to run pretty red. So that resource is very useful. But as we decided, we had the Carrion Husk in the sideboard, we decided in for things like Guardian, um, basically matchups where we expected to take big hits. We kind of found after a while that it was just better in every single matchup. Like against Warrior, you can essentially time walk your opponent, make them take off a turn. You can turn off, big hit triggers, whether that's on a plunder run turn from a ninja. There's just so many things, and I think that it's really important to pretty much play that in every single matchup. Obviously, not against like Wizard or something like that, but really, really good card. One thing that we discerned from testing, um, through the different iterations of this deck was that it seems like blue blood deck cards are sort of a trap. This list you'll see in front of you is playing 3 blue rift binds. That's mainly to go along with plunder run turns. I sort of still disagree with including those because especially if you're ever going to be playing dimensional crossroads, these blue blood deck cards can be a massive liability, and they almost always have 0 to no impact. So I think you'd rather have just any blue attack action or non-attack action instead of that. But with that said, yeah, we have, as you will see in front of you right now, we have cut pretty much all blue blood deck cards. I think we have 1 yellow Riftbind in the sideboard.
Mhm.
So in terms of blood depth, we focus on the reds for sure. The deck ratios. So when I talk about ratios, I'm talking about how many blues, how many yellows, how many reds. There is a bit of math behind it, but this deck has sort of been developed from a feeling out process. With that said, I know Jason Log did do the ratios on it, and that's how we landed on as many blues as we are playing now. But outside of the resource base, you also have to focus on non-attack actions and attack actions. Non-attack actions, like we said, are super important for that Nebula Blade. You need to be turning that on. You need to be coming in for 4, and that hit trigger needs to be live. That's really what makes your deck hard to block. At the same time, your Art of Wars always need to be live. Like you can't have a turn where you have an Art of War ready to go, and then you draw all non-attack actions. That's absolutely devastating. So we do have a certain amount of attack actions and non-attack actions in the deck to both facilitate the Nebula Blade and facilitate the Art of War turns.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead, Hayden.
I was going to say on that, one of the things I really like about this build in particular, and it's important to know, I think, in the end, the 3 of us that played this in the PTI, so the deck finished 2nd, 4th, and it had a top 16 as well. So one thing to note is that we all played slightly different lists in the end. We couldn't agree on the last 5 cards, as Brendan talked about, with some of the blues and the resources. The Mutated Mass, for instance, not all of us played. So there's a few different variations within the deck. There's still a few disagreements between some of the players playing it, but I think the main thing and the thing I really like about this deck, which I think everyone would agree who has played the deck, is the fact that you have a ability, especially in the mirror, to be able to present more damage early on. So a lot of the decks, or the chain decks I've seen so far, and what we played against in the weekend at the PTI in the mirror, were really reliant around those blood deck cards and their banish. A lot of their cards didn't do too much outside of playing from banish or these big throw together hands. They weren't playing cards like CNC that we have in the sideboard, cards like Enlightened Strike. Some weren't even playing, cards like Howl from Beyond, which is really impactful to create these big turns. So definitely one of the things I like about this deck is just the damage. But Meet and Greet wasn't a card that everyone has been playing. But as Brendan said, with timing that Runechant token at the right time can be really devastating alongside Seeds of Agony. So probably my favorite thing about the deck is just how much damage it can put out from turn 1, which can be really impactful. I mean, I definitely had multiple turns, both in testing and through the event, where putting out 17, 18, 19 damage on turn 2 was pretty reasonable. So off just one Soul Shackle. So yeah, the deck felt really strong.
Yeah, so pretty much our core reasoning behind behind our decision to pursue this deck is that we found pretty much no deck in the format was able to race it. So if somebody wanted to go no blocks, there's essentially no deck that would present more damage than you would on a turn-by-turn basis. There's a bit of variance there because of Art of War and Plunder Run, but it seemed to be extremely consistent. Your Carrion Husk is just is very, very powerful in those situations. With that said, the deck has has very, very few weak matchups, right? The aforementioned ones are going to be Ninja Control, which can fatigue you out, and then also certain builds of Guardian. I think for Guardian to beat you consistently, they have to have kind of have tech to disrupt what you're doing. Other than that, just the traditional like Spinal, Crippling, Crush list, they're just not enough, especially when you have the Carrying Husk to block it out on an important turn. Also, we have a card in the sideboard called Invert Existence, which we do use to close out games versus those turtle decks, especially Guardian. And we find that once an opponent is around 10 life, they can't reliably block out your turn consistently. Like you'll be able to present more than 12 damage, whether that's, and it's going to be coming on two fronts, right? It's going to be coming from the arcane and the physical. So you can lock your opponent pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it's your opponent has to make a decision about what equipment they play as well. As soon as they decide to play a null rune equipment, like a null rune arms or null rune boots, whatever it is, they're taking a piece of blocking equipment away from their deck most likely as well. So yeah, they're transitioning to be able to block some of your arcane damage, but they're actually taking 2-3 defense away from their physical side as well, which is really important when you have cards like Nebula Blade and Meet and Greet with these breakpoints of 4, which is so important, in the game of Flesh and Blood in general, but especially in this deck where these on-hit effects matter so much. So yeah, Brendan, why don't we go break down some of the cards in the core of the deck quickly before we move through to the sideboard. Just want to note this is a 53 card core that you see in front of you. And then there's the additional sideboard cards where we're getting up to minimum, of course, 60 every game, but in some matchups even up to 64, 65, depending on the matchup. So Brendan, is any cards you want to talk about specifically to start with? Do you want to talk about maybe some of these resources? I know you don't fully agree on the Riftbind or even maybe the Mutated Mass, but we've got 19 blues here. What about something like Mothra Skies? How important is that as a resource to the deck?
Yeah, Mothra Skies is it's an interesting one because it blocks for 2. This deck doesn't like cards that block for 2, but there are just going to be some all-stars that you got to put in your deck. I mean, the most powerful one is actually going to be Blue Seeds. You're going to play all the Seeds. You're going to play 9 Seeds in your deck. It's one of the strongest cards in the deck. It enables so many different things, and also that arcane damage, like we talked about, is just so critical. That being said, Mothra Skies can be really good. It can give you go again, either when you don't want to shackle or when you do have enough, kind of attacks to need go again and a shackle, and you're going to be presenting this really long chain link. So I think that the blue Mothra Skies is a really good addition. There's also a card down there called Vexing Malice. Blue Vexing Malice, the 2 arcane damage, great for closing out games. Unfortunately, you can't play it from Blood Death, so it's not a super reliable card, but you can go ahead and arsenal that card if your opponent is around that 10 life total and close out a game with it. So it's pretty good. Other than that, just a great resource card. The Spellblade Assault, that is in there purely for Mutated Mass, but like we talked about, blue Blood Deaths are a bit of a trap, so it's good filler and just getting that resource curve correct. Shadowverser, of course, just a fantastic card all around. It's kind of funny that it is blue because we'd probably play it if it was red. It's so good.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, there is the blue Riftbind, which is that one is up for debate. I personally would cut them, but they do have some applicable uses, being used with Plunder Run, being used with the Hawthorne Beyond. But I find that they can be a bit of a liability, especially if you ever find yourself on a Dimensional Crossroads game plan. Then get a little bit stuck in that zone. And then there is this card, Mutated Mass. So Hayden, why don't you talk to me about Mutated Mass and some of the yellows we have in the deck?
Yeah, so Mutated Mass was a card that I wasn't sold on, so I didn't actually play Mutated Mass in the PTI. I opted to play blue Meet and Greets instead. To Brendan's point, I played a lot less, I guess, blue Blood Debt in the PTI. So went with the blue Meet and Greets, which did some work for me. I also didn't play these Spellblade Assaults because I wasn't playing the Mutated Mass. I played 2 less blues overall than my 2 teammates did. But I've sort of come around on the thinking a little bit, and today we're previewing the deck that did come, the deck list that came second. So Mutated Mass is quite interesting in that it's not going to defend well for you ever. So it's never a card that you're going to defend with, but it is a card that you can use as resources to pitch for your blue, which is important. And if you do banish this card, it is a blue Blood Debt card, unlike blue Riftbind, that it is always going to have impact. So you're almost always able to come in with this card for 4, is what we found on your turns, because you're generally pitching 2 cards to do things like play 1 card out of banish, attack with Nebula Blade, maybe play something like a Howl, or if the turn starts with an Art of War, then you're really rolling, and Mutated Mass can actually be really, really strong in those turns. So look, I'm definitely coming around it, and I think it's a card that just allows you to play blue Blood Deck cards that actually do something. And one of the things about this deck is that it's currently in the 53 card core. You've got 28 Blood Deck cards, and you can go up to 32 or 34 with the sideboard. So you can make sure that over half your deck or around half your deck is blood deck cards, which is is pretty important. So mutated mass just adds to that. In terms of some of the yellows, I mean, we can't really go far without talking about. I mean, we only play 6, but you can't not talk about Art of War in this deck. It's the cornerstone of this deck. Brendan, I'm sure you'd agree. The biggest turns you put out with this deck involve Art of War. The fact that you get to banish and draw 2 cards, and it's not a cost. You're actively getting 2 cards, and you get to play that card out of banish. Whether it's something like a Banning Demigon, a Riftbind, and Unhallowed Rites, which we have here as well, is very good. So Art of War, you're almost always, I would say 90-80% of the time banishing and drawing. Maybe 95-90% of the time. Sometimes you need to play it and you don't have a good card to banish. And then it kind of splits, I would say, between the +1 and the go again. I would say, and Brendan, correct me if you've found something different in your testing, but I'm generally going with +1/+1 because of the ways that you have to get go again with Shadow Puppetry and the Soul Shackle and Shadow Versa. Would you disagree or agree?
Well, I think it is slightly contextual in the sense that you do get to see your Chane banished before. So let's say you have 4 Soul Shackles, and you come up with 4 attack actions that you're going to want to play. Then maybe you go for the go again. But if you have your Snapdragons up, you've got your Soul Shackle, you've got these Mauvrin Skies, these Shadow Puppets are going to give you a go again. I find that I choose +1 and banish and draw 2 90% of the time, at least. And it's very, very impactful because you can come in with 3 attack actions usually at that point that are all going to have that +1. So yeah, that's usually my mode of choice as well.
Yeah, very impactful. And then just maybe talking about some of the other cards that we play that maybe other lists that you might have seen don't play. We play all 3 Unhallowed Rites. Maybe not all lists play those, but Unhallowed Rites is it's a red blood deck card that comes in for 4, but has this fantastic ability to put your Hell from Beyonds and your Seeds on the bottom of your deck, so you get to refuel the bottom of your deck for your banished late game, which is I underestimated this card. This card has been fantastic for that purpose. An attack for 4 that costs 1 that you can play out of banish that refuels the deck is just so important. And then we play in Lightning Strike, which as a card I think is just super important for fixing your hands. Sometimes you draw these awkward hands where you have multiple red blood deck cards and you don't have enough resources to maybe pay for what you want to do. And Lightning Strike is cost 0, at least you put a blood deck card back to the bottom and still come in for 7 damage. So you get a hand where you can maybe play something like I love it with Shadow Puppetry as well. I'm not sure if you've done that very often, Brendan, but I love that play.
Yeah. Take for 8.
Yeah, take for 8. Come in with your Nebula Blade afterwards for 4 off a 3-card hand. Is pretty awesome. So yeah, any other cards you want to talk about, Brendan, before we move into the sideboard and the equipment?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to talk about Soul Reaping. It's probably the second best card in the deck outside of Art of War. It is an extremely high variance card, being that if you banish it, it's gone. If you don't, you don't have to with Soul Reaping. You don't have to pay the cost if you have a blood deck card in hand, and you actually gain resources for the amount of blood deck cards you banish with it. So it can lead to some incredibly explosive turns. And I would say that playing this deck, you'll feel noticeable difference on the games where you get to play Soul Reaping versus the games where you don't. Also want to talk about Meet and Greet, like you talked about, like we said before, because we are using that Nebula Blade, we do have a lot of instances of arcane damage. Meet and Greet is a major punish for taking that 1. And, on top of that, it also will create a rune chant itself on hit. So just a really, really tough card for the opponent to deal with. And I think probably the strongest card that you can include that's contingent arcane damage. There's some others that you could consider, like Consuming Volition, obviously like Rip the Reality and Pierce the Shadow Vibes. But I think I think Meet and Greet is the most punishing of the few by far. I also just want to talk about our general red attack action. So you see we have Riftbind, Bounding Demigon, Unhallowed Rites. So this is important. We don't play Rift the Reality, Pierce the Shadow Vibes. And it seems like those cards might be good for us, right? Because if we're swinging the Nebula Blade a lot, we may have a lot of rune chants, which will enable these cards. But we ultimately find in a sort of redliner deck like this that cards that cost 2 like that are a bit expensive, like Hell from Beyond is already sort of pushing it, but its impact is so great. Where when you have Rip the Reality and Pierce the Shadow Vibes, we don't find the impact to be nearly as big. So we actually opt to not play those cards, and we stay to the lower cost ones, which is going to be that Bounding Demigon, that Riftbind, and that Unhallowed Rites. But I agree again, Bounding Demigon and Unhallowed Rites, I think both require you to play a Is it a non-attack action to be
Non-attack
able to play
action.
out of your bag?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so normally that would be a liability, but our deck is built for non-attack actions. It's built to swing that blade, so it's built to be playing those. So those almost never get stuck in our zone as a result. So they are good choices for this deck.
Yeah, I mean, it's 20 non-attack actions main deck in this 53 cards. So, your likelihood of finding one either in your four card hand or with your seeds and your house off the top into your banishes, is really high. There are definitely turns in this with this deck where I've not been able to play the Bounding or the Unhallowed, and it hurts. I had a game where I banished 3 Unhallowed Rights. Just, pretty pretty unlucky. The same turn, banish all 3. But it kind of is what it is. The raw power of the deck really outweighs that, I think, and the other thing with those, those 2 cost ones, like you say, like the rip, like the piercing shadow device, is that not only are they intensive on your resources, but you can get these really awkward hands where you get multiple, you banish multiple at once, and you actually just cannot play both of them. It's going to cost you more than 1 blue in hand. So you're always thinking, I need to keep a 4-card hand. I can't even defend that well because if I banish some of these cards, I'm just going to be in a really bad spot. All right, Brendan,
Absolutely.
should we move on to the sideboard and the equipment suite?
Yep, let's go. All right, so now looking at the sideboard, we're just going to go from left to right here. So Dimensional Crossroads, this card is immensely powerful. We originally didn't include it in the deck because it seems like it fits more in like a control-y Chane deck that really tries to utilize its power. But we found this card to be incredibly powerful against decks that would try to stall us out. So decks like Guardian, Ninja Control. This is basically your game plan on how to win the game. If you can get 1 to 2 of these out and soul shackle very conservatively, so you're never losing them to taking damage on your own turn, these can end up doing 5+ damage each to your opponent. We find that even if your opponent does play Null Rune, because of the diversity of your attack actions on the combat chain, it's almost always inefficient for them to pitch and block any arcane damage at all. So this can be an extremely punishing card and is the most important card when you're facing up against those harder matchups, notably being Guardian and Ninja Control.
Yeah, completely agree. It's not a card that you want a lot of the time, but it's a card that's necessary to avoid that fatigue in those matchups. They know how much damage your deck can put out, but if you've got a card that's a permanent, that's always presenting a threat, that's taking 1 card of their hand every time to prevent that Null, it's going to make your job a lot easier getting through that damage. Chains of Eminence, that's another card I think we should talk about, Brendan. That card, is basically, so far from what we've tested and what we've found, fantastic in the mirror. So the times I've been able to play this into the mirror, it's just been absolutely backbreaking. You can often you're naming something like a Seeds or a Riftbind if they're on that classic 999 build. We're seeing a lot less of that now. But Seeds is often a very good card to name, especially if they're trying to hold Seeds in their banish zone to set up a big Riftbind turn. The other one that's quite impactful you can name is actually Carrion Husk. So one of the things about this game is it's a real dance of Carrion Husk around where you get to the right point of lifetime to break it. So if you've got an opponent who passes their turn, they're on 15, 16, they've still they feel like they're enough life to use their Carrion Husk on this turn. This is the turn they want to use it. They want to block out your big attack and then come back with their hand. And you slam down a Chains and name Carrion Husk, you're going to bust their Carrion Husk that turn almost certainly. So that's a big swing in the game. Any other cards that you find that you're naming with Chains of Eminence in the mirror, or are you bringing in other matchups, Brendan?
So far only in the mirror, but I think that could change with more testing. That being said, I do almost universally name Seeds, but Seeds and Husk. Husk in the right situation, of course, but I do sometimes name Art of War if I'm in a situation where I know what do I lose to, and the answer is literally only Art of War. I can go ahead and name Art of War. So yeah, that is a card that I will name sometimes. But if I don't know any Chane decks right now that don't run 9 Seeds, so it's very safe bet to name the Seeds. This is also a non-attack action to turn on your Nebula Blade. So a lot of good stuff going on with this card.
Yeah.
I just want to move on to Command and Conquer. This is debatably a staple in the deck, mostly because Command and Conquer has a super irrelevant hit trigger. A lot of decks will try to have hold back and not block against you on certain turns to have a large pivot turn, whether they hit you with a Spinal, or they're just it's going to be a lot of damage. It could be an aggro ninja that's going to kind of be doing a lot of Minnowism stuff, just going off, or has hit triggers on their Whelming Gust Wave. And Command and Conquer a lot of time will just make them do that. And if you play it in the early game, it can demand a lot of armor blocks, which is really, really good for your deck. It helps you close out the games. That being said, there is Shadow Puppetry in the deck in every matchup, and Shadow Puppetry CNC is probably one of the most disgusting combos out of Monarch. That's going to have Command and Conquer come in for 7 and have an additional on-hit trigger being that if it hits, you're allowed to look at the top card of your deck and banish it if you want to. So Command and Conquer is pretty standard. Hayden, when do you find yourself siding Command and Conquer out?
I would say in most matchups I'm playing some number of Command and Conquer. There's some matchups where, so we have a 53 card core, and there's definitely some matchups where some of these other cards are coming in against aggressive matchups, or some of these extra blues are coming in where I'm finding that maybe only 2 Command and Conquer are coming in. But most of the time they're coming in some number. I'm trying to think if there's any matchups where I didn't want to play any of them. Command and Conquer is interesting. I think it is a really impactful card, especially in the early turns of the game, and it's one of the cards that allows this deck to present damage early. I really like the card when you're going second, especially, because you can pressure your opponent who's gone first, and the advantage of going first is obviously getting a card to Arsenal, so you get to pressure that. Sometimes going first, I felt less that I wanted this card, so some matchups I might have played maybe 3 on the draw, but 2 on the play, for instance. So. But yeah, Command and Conquer, like you say, with Shadow Puppetry is probably one of my favorite combos to put together as well. Card I wanted to talk about next, Brendan, if you don't mind, is Gorganian Tome. I know this is a card that wasn't originally in the list, but I think even now, not sure if you've come around on it yet.
Oh yeah, it's in my Blitz list now. I like it.
So Gorganian Tome is, it's a non-attack action that's going to turn on your Nebula Blade, but it's also going to let you basically play off a 1 or 2 card hand with Nebula Blade or your Banish, which is really important. So it's going to allow you to, turn on Bounding Demigons and Unhallowed Rites out of your Banish zone as well, off just, potentially even just 1 card. So if you have to force to block out with 3 cards and you get to keep the Gorganian Tome, you can still pitch this, play this, draw into resources to pitch and play cards out. Whereas if, this was a blue or a yellow or a red, you're not going to be able to play a non-attack action and then play something. So the other thing it does as well is that when you're keeping to a tight 60 in this deck, it's just a way to filter through your deck, which is actually pretty relevant. One thing to keep in mind though, as this card gets more popular, is how you play this card. I've definitely seen it a bit more over the past weekend. So in certain matchups, so actually for the mirror, I had decided if I played against Dan or Mo, I actually wasn't going to bring this card in. Yeah, so. And I don't know if that's necessarily the correct decision. You could bring it in, but you've got to be really careful about the way maybe you tuck it with E-Strike, or maybe you set it in Arsenal and you try and find the right time to use it. I think on the play, I might have brought it in to set it in Arsenal, but yeah, I think it's a card you got to be a lot more careful with once people start playing them. Because if you let your opponent draw 2 cards off of it, that's going to be massive for them. The Yellow Riftbind, as we talked about, so Yellow Riftbind and the Third Howl are really ways to get up your blood deck count and be more aggressive, so that when you're soul shackling every turn, you're finding hits. It's generally where you're trying to race decks, so it's less about the defensive side and more about just upping that count with cards that are impactful. So fortunately, you can't play 4/5 Red Riftbind, so this does a pseudo job of being that. And then the third Howl as well is coming in when you're trying to be aggressive. When you're trying to be defensive and maybe you're trying to play a bit more of a mid-range style, banishing 1 or 2 Howl through the game can be pretty devastating if you have to hold resources to play it. I know a card that you really like is Invert Existence. Brendan, do you want to tell us about that card?
Yeah, so Invert Existence is pretty much only comes in the matchups where you would be playing Dimensional Crossroads. It's also just really a finisher against people who would look to turtle against you. It's very effective against, I think, Control Ninja and Guardian, especially there. Like towards the end when they're at sub 10 life, they're just going to be blocking out like literally everything, and coming in for 2 damage is really, really tough for them to deal with, and can be a great way. And like we talked about, there's cards that will benefit from that arcane damage hitting as well. You can also do it at the end. And you can play it in the mirror, and you can do it at the end of a Shane's turn, and you can put 2 blood deck cards in their banish zone, and then they'll die. I've seen that happen a few times. So the card is pretty versatile, but I tend to bring it in more against more controlling decks. But I definitely think there's a spot for it in the mirror. I haven't tested with it enough, but in the mirror, it is purely to kill your opponent the final turn.
I can attest that at least 1 is very good. So we were on the plan of bringing 1 in the mirror, and I definitely killed. So I played 3 chain mirrors in rounds 1, 2, and 3, and Definitely killed my round 3 opponent with it. It's a very impactful card. I like it less against, like you're saying, something like a ninja aggro, because it doesn't defend and there's only 2 damage up front. But once you pitch it and get it back through against control decks, that's where it really, really, really shines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of these cards, I think, so we have 4 blues here, so we can go up to, minimum 21 blue. 2 blue cards from here are basically coming in every single time, whether that's the extra 2 Riftbind, because they defend for 3 and do a bit of a job, or it's the invert. I think, as Brendan says, these blue Riftbinds could be something else. They could be cards that don't have blood debt, so they could be like the blue Mean Greeds, for instance. I think one card I played 1 blue Unhallowed Rites as my 22nd blue card that I really liked. Just away in some of those grindy matchups, that's a blue that gets something like a Seeds or a Howl on the bottom of your deck, fill back up your deck. These last 3 cards are interesting. So basically this Ninth Blade was an 80th card for us for the Prison matchup. Only comes in against Prison, that's all it does. I'm not so sold on it. I think this could definitely be something else once we've done some more testing and work out some cards that maybe we want for the Mirror, or maybe even this Katsu Control deck, which ended up being sort of a thorn in the side of this deck. And then 2 Springboard Somersault. These are purely, personally, I only bought these in against Guardian. I didn't bring them against anything else. Yeah.
Only against Guardian. So the Guardian list itself, like, I guess if you get like Spinal, that's a bit rough. But they really have to high roll to give this deck some trouble. That being said, if the Guardian is prepared for this matchup and is aware of what this deck can do, there are other cards that they can put into their deck that are really hard for you to deal with. I guess I'll go ahead and say it because I just don't want to face it. But like the red Crush the Weeks are really annoying. There's just like if they increase the amount of cards that you just like really can't afford to take a hit, it's tough to beat them. That being said, if you're able to take the damage they put out, the amount that you'll be hitting them back with is just so astronomically more relevant, because a lot of your hit triggers will hurt them, allow you to keep going off, and it's generally a pretty favorable matchup for Chane. That being said, these Springboards, I think they are like going to be the worst card in the deck when you do bring them in. But let's say you've used your Carrion Husk, or there's so many situations, but you're blocking, they pummel, you blanket with a Springboard, or the Springboard does, you block for 3 and then the Springboard comes over and makes it for 7 and you end up not taking the Crush trigger. It can literally win you the game.
Yeah.
But Springboard is just such a weird card because like it sucks in your hand, it sucks in your banish, and it's only good in your arsenal. And the arsenal in this deck is so it's already like very congested, right? Like every time you get an R4, you want to throw that in arsenal. Every time you get a Plunder Run, you better be throwing that in arsenal. So it's like sticking this Springboard in the arsenal is it makes it a bit tough. So it honestly could get cut eventually, but we just have to feel the Guardian matchup out more.
Yeah, it felt like one of the matchups I was a little bit worried about. I thought they could, like you say, high roll it, get back-to-back Spinal Crushes plus a Crush the Week or something, and really cause some issues. So it's a card that I felt I wanted to play. I kind of saw it as an insurance policy. Stick in the arsenal, yeah, it makes my deck a little bit worse. But I already felt that the matchup was favored as long as they didn't get those sort of back-to-back turns. So I've got that insurance policy, and I can take having a slightly weaker deck to do that. Last few cards we'll just quickly talk about. So we play 3 Arcane Barrier with the Naran Gloves, the Naran Robe, and the Crown. There's 3 slots in this deck. Basically, we felt that. Well, I certainly felt that until further testing, there's a few more slots that maybe we want to fill up. But playing these 3 against Wizard, if we did encounter it, was fine. It's probably not. It's probably a matchup that could be a little bit tougher, to be honest. I haven't done much testing against it. I don't know if you have, Brendan.
No, because nobody plays it. But if they did, yeah, it could be tough. So like, I can just pull from my experience in Blitz, where there's a similar list that we play. We've actually found it to just be categorically better against Wizard to play the Spell Void 2 Helm with Null Rune 3, because you just don't need the Snapdragons, because you're already going to be using your Shackles to kind of have go again and come in for so much damage. That being said, I don't know if that would be as applicable in Constructed, because it is a much higher life total. And that Spell Void 2 is just a pop it and then it's gone. So it's interesting. I think that one thing you could add to this deck though is maybe a Tunic for Control Ninja. Like the Carrion Husk is really good, but you got to understand that your way to win that game is through Dimensional Crossroads, and Carrion Husk is just an absolute non-bow with Dimensional Crossroads. It will immediately pop them all. But that still needs further testing.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about the Snapdragon Scalers as well. I mean, it's like in a lot of decks, you hear this statement said a lot. It's like one of the best cards in the deck. I pop it consistently if I know I can get my opponent to 10 health or less. Once they're there, they're pretty much locked out of the game. There's nothing they can do, whether I have the snappies or not. But yeah, I mean, you're looking for the highest value out of it on that Art of War turn, on that Plunder Run turn. You're just coming in with a bunch of attack actions and ripping every single card out of your opponent's hand.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And we already talked about the equipment suite. Obviously, the Nebula Blade, the Skull Cap, the Carrion Husk, and the Grasp. They're always standard. One thing I did want to say before we finish off is in the mirror, I'm not playing any Null. I don't think it's necessary right now with the way the decks are playing. You just would rather have that 3 defense. It's so much more important for stopping those Nebula Blades, those CNCs or any on-hit effects, meet and greet, etc. So, cool. All right. Well, that's the Classic Constructed Chane deck that the 3 of us played in the PTI, as put together by Brendan, Davis, and Dante. In the future, this is something that we will look to do a bit more. So if you've got suggestions of formats or decks that you'd like to hear us do a deck tech on, please let us know. Drop a comment or send us an email. Otherwise, anything else from you, Brendan, before we sign off?
Yeah, I just want to hype up the upcoming Arsenal Pass podcast. We have a super special episode where we actually have Kieran from Legendary Studios, also well known from Session Blood. He joins us on the podcast. We go through a very in-depth interview, a lot of questions on organized play, some unheard information regarding the upcoming Judge program, just a lot to unpack there. And I think that, we had a really good talk with him and you guys will really enjoy.
Yep, 100%. All right. Well, until next time, we'll see you on the pod this week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.